Most people discover what their life was actually about only after the years that would have let them change it are already gone. That is not a pessimistic observation. It is the most common pattern in human experience. And Nietzsche, who spent his career studying what makes a life genuinely lived versus a life merely endured, had a precise name for why it happens, and a precise answer for what to do when you realize it. The answer is not to grieve the time. It is to stop wasting what remains. Here is how the drift happens. Not through catastrophic decisions, through the accumulation of defaults. At some point in your life, probably in your 20s or 30s, you made a series of choices that were not really choices. You took the job that made sense given your circumstances. You stayed in the city where you had already built a life. You pursued the version of success that your family would recognize, your colleagues would respect, your neighbors would confirm. None of those decisions were obviously wrong. Some of them were genuinely right. But the accumulation of approved choices has a specific quality that only becomes visible from a distance. It produces a life that everyone around you can affirm, and that you alone know is not quite yours. Nietzsche called this living according to the herd's values instead of your own. He was not using herd as an insult. He was using it as a description of how social systems work. They reward conformity, they punish deviation, and they make the conventional path feel not just safe but virtuous, the specific moment. And you will recognize this. There is something you told yourself you would do, not a vague fantasy, a specific plan with a specific shape. The trip you would take when the children were grown. The work you would do when you had more freedom. The relationship you would invest in when the pressure of the career years eased. When did that become someday? And when did someday stop having a date attached? Most people, when they sit honestly with this question, cannot identify the moment the plan shifted from concrete to indefinite. It happened gradually. Other things were more urgent. The window kept moving forward. And then it had been a decade since you stopped thinking of it as an actual plan, and another decade before you noticed you had stopped. This is not failure. This is the standard outcome of a life lived primarily in response to external demands. The external demands are always more urgent than your actual priorities. And urgency, over time, defeats importance. The herd path is structured specifically to produce this outcome. And this is the part Nietzsche was most precise about. Conventional life does not just permit drift. It rewards it. The person who stays in the stable job is reliable. The person who doesn't take the risk is prudent. The person who subordinates their own priorities to their family's needs is selfless. These are genuine virtues. And they are also, in the wrong proportion, the mechanism by which a life passes without ever becoming fully your own. Nietzsche wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. To be your own man is a hard business." What he meant was not that community is bad. He meant that the approval of the community, the need for it, the reliance on it as the primary measure of whether a choice is correct, is a specific kind of dependency. And dependencies shape behavior in ways the dependent person often cannot see from inside the dependency. You may have spent significant portions of your life maintaining a version of yourself that was built not for you, but for the audience of your professional and social world. The version that performed well at the company. The version that fit the family's expectation of who you were. The version that avoided the conversations that would have required admitting what you actually wanted. That version had real costs, not just in the things you didn't do, in the person you didn't become while you were maintaining it. Here is the midpoint question, and take a moment with it before moving on. If the people whose approval you spent years seeking could no longer give or withhold it, if their opinion of your choices became completely unavailable, what would you do differently tomorrow? Not in the abstract. Specifically, one thing. The answer to that question is information about where your actual values live versus where your performed values live. And the gap between those two locations is the territory that Nietzsche spent his career trying to get people to examine honestly. Amor, Fati. Two Latin words that Nietzsche considered his most important contribution. Love of fate. Not the resignation of a person who has given up. The active decision of a person who claims their actual life, including the years spent chasing the wrong things, including the someday that became never, including the version of yourself that was built for someone else's approval, as genuinely and completely theirs. My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. This sounds, on the surface, like an instruction to accept whatever happened and move on. It is not. It is something more demanding and more useful. Amor Fati is the refusal to spend your remaining years in a holding pattern of regret about the years that are already gone. Not because the regret is unjustified. Some of it may be entirely justified. But because the regret, maintained as an ongoing orientation, is the last and most expensive way to continue wasting the time you are trying to recover. The person who spends their 60s grieving the choices of their 40s has not learned from the drift. They have simply changed its content. Now the arithmetic, not to produce despair, but to produce clarity. At 65, the average American has roughly 17 to 19 years of active, healthy life remaining. That is not a small number, but it is a specific number. And specific numbers clarify in ways that vague notions of time remaining do not. 17 years is enough time to build something that matters, to invest in a relationship that has been neglected, to do the work you kept telling yourself you would do when conditions were better, to have the conversation you have been postponing for a decade. It is not enough time to wait another 5 years before starting. Nietzsche wrote, "The secret for harvesting from existence, the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously." He did not mean physically dangerous. He meant, stop waiting for safety to arrive before you begin living the life that is actually yours. The safety never fully arrives. The risk of beginning never disappears. The only question is whether you will take it with the years you have, or spend those years waiting for conditions that will not be significantly different in 5 years than they are today. What Amor Fati looks like is a practical decision at this stage of life. Not reinvention. Not abandonment of everything you have built. Not the dramatic gesture that requires you to start from zero. One honest question, applied to the next meaningful choice. Is this decision being made for me, or for the version of myself I have been performing for others? That question, applied consistently, to how you spend your time, to what relationships you invest in, to what work you choose to do with the years remaining, produces a different life than the question, what is the approved choice here? The approved choice is always available. It is always safer seeming. It always has more external support. And it has a consistent track record across millions of lives of producing the specific realization that most people arrive at too late. This is not a warning delivered from the outside. You have already felt it from the inside, the weight of it. The specific quality of time passing in a direction you didn't fully choose. What Nietzsche was saying, and what the concept of Amor Fati makes available to anyone willing to use it, is that this realization is not the end of the story. It is, if you let it be, the beginning of the part of the story that is actually yours. The time you have is not a consolation prize for the time that is already gone. It is simply the time you have. And what you do with it, starting with the next honest decision, is still genuinely up to you. That has not changed. That is still true. Tell me where I'm wrong. Comment section is open, and I read every one of them. Subscribe if this actually made you think. Philosophy every week. No fluff, no motivation posters.